But evolutionists love dinosaurs because they can use it to tell the kids that everything's millions of years old and the world's always had death and suffering. The Bible, of course, says the world's about 6,000 years ago, and death and suffering came into the world through Adam's sin. Very different worldviews. But in fact, as I'll hopefully show you, dinosaurs are extremely good evidence for the global flood of Noah's day, as well as for a short time frame. And it's so important, I think, parents and grandparents should know more than their kids and grandkids about subjects, including dinosaurs. I'm hoping I'll be helping you with that. So first of all, I want to explain, I go to Creation Ministries International. We have a lot of offices around the world, 7 offices around the world. We have a website, creation.com, which I hope you can remember easily. Has loads of articles. Also, fairly recently, in the last few years, we've been putting up a lot of creation videos for people who have shorter attention spans. Also got longer videos. We've also got a lot of 1-minute videos. Now, one place you can find out a lot of information is through our free email newsletter, and I'm going to pass some clipboards around. Just put your name and your email, but if you put your postcode, it means you'll be informed of any creation speakers in the area. So go ahead and pass, please. Thanks for your patience. And one thing that it'll do is give you some articles which are very topical. We won't spam you, and we promise not to send or sell you or give away your address to any third party. We will protect your privacy. You won't be spammed by a whole lot of people you've never heard of. But anything topical in the news, you'll get some good articles that will explain what's going on. Like the latest missing link discovery will remind you that they found the latest missing link last year and the year before that and 100 years ago with the infamous Scopes trial. And the thing is, they don't believe those missing links anymore. They hope you've forgotten. They don't believe those anymore. But they want you to have the impression that there are loads of missing links that have been discovered, even though they don't believe them. None of the evidence used in the Scopes trial, which is actually 100 years ago this month, they believe anymore. But they use it to try to take down the Bible. That's what the whole thing was. The whole thing was set up to give publicity for the town, as well as to try to undermine the Bible. No one was in danger of being put in jail or anything like that. Another book you might like is my Genesis commentary. The only commentary in the world that talks about dinosaurs. And it is 800 pages long, going through Genesis 1 to, actually goes to Genesis 12:3, because I wanted to get the very important Abrahamic covenant in, especially when the state of Israel is under such attack by wicked men, to point out that God was very clear that those who disparage Abraham's children, God will curse them, and God will bless those who bless Abraham's children. That's Genesis 12:3. And this commentary is still only about a third of the size of a typical congressional omnibus spending bill, so you should have no problem. Now, about dinosaurs, though, it's so important to be ready to have good answers, but the thing is, what happens when people ask you all these questions about things like dinosaurs and Noah's flood, where the water go, and about aliens, life on other planets, things like carbon dating, so important to actually have answers. And one book you might go to is called our Creation Answers book. It's got 20 questions and 60 chapters, so pretty handy. And it comes with other packs too. Now, the Bible is the history book of the universe. This is where we should go to find the true history of dinosaurs. But one thing I like to do is to define terms. It's also important if the cultists come to you or knock on the door, and they will use the same language as Christians use, but they're given a totally different meaning. That's how they try and trick you, by having different meanings on the same terms. So I want to actually define a dinosaur. Now, dinosaurs were a type of reptile, but one unique feature is they walked with their legs vertically. And that's because they have this well-designed femur. God designed this femur, the thigh bone, with a processing. They call that a process in an anatomy, and it goes into part of the hip. But it means the dinosaur walks with vertical legs, upright, while the crocodiles have the sprawling legs. So crocodiles, the Komodo dragon, other lizards, they're not dinosaurs. I don't believe there are dinosaurs alive today, because you can't count crocodiles because the legs are completely different. It's a completely different type of animal. Another thing where the thigh goes into the hip bone is another unique feature of dinosaurs. They have a hole there. I don't know if you know much about your own hip structure. You have a cup shape there. Most animals have a cup shape there. And they call this thing with this fancy Latin term. They like to make fancy Latin and Greek terms for science. I don't know why. German and Chinese just have their own language to do things. We go to Greek and Latin. This word here, acetabulum, which Gino Geraci said was now his new favorite Christian swear word. You're such an acetabulum, but it's actually not a swear word, okay. It actually is Latin for little vinegar cup. So most of the time in our hips, it's a cup shape. Dinosaurs are unique. There's a hole there, a very big hole. So going back to the history book of our universe, what does it tell us about dinosaurs? Well, it tells us that on day 6, God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds. Now, 10 times in Genesis, God says according to their kinds. Not one kind evolving into another kind. See, the direct creation of distinct kinds. But God also programmed these kinds with enormous genetic potential. So lots of varieties can arise from these kinds, but it's not one kind evolving into a different kind. But of course, also on day 6, God made humans. You see, you have male and female in his image, given dominion. But from that, it logically follows that dinosaurs and humans lived at the same time. You can't escape this. I mean, that's not what you find in most of your books. Our books are the exception. But most dinosaur books you pick up for the kids say dinosaurs died out 66 million years ago, long before humans. The Bible says, no, that's not correct. Now, one pushback you might get is, if dinosaurs and humans lived together, why don't we find their fossils together? Well, go to the assumption behind the objection. See, the assumption behind that is if things live together, then they will be fossilized together. But is this a correct assumption? Well, no, it's certainly not. We know this for a fact because in the foreground here we have a coelacanth which was supposed to have died with the dinosaurs because of where we find the fossils. But in about 1938 they discovered these things were living today in the ocean. Now whales, the back one's a whale flipper, the tail a fluke. Whales and coelacanths are never found fossilized together, but we know for a fact that they live together because we find them together, okay, in the ocean. So just because things live together, it doesn't guarantee they'll be fossilized together. And the reason for this is the fossil record is not a sequence of age, it's a sequence of burial. Things had to be buried to get a fossil, and buried really quickly. And what would do that is the flood of Noah's day. So you're seeing the sequence of flood burial is what you're seeing. And it seems that dinosaurs lived close to the ocean. And we know that because sometimes you find dinosaur and sea fossils in the same place, shellfish and fish with dinosaur fossils. But we know dinosaurs were land creatures. So how do you get land creatures fossilized with marine creatures? The reason is they were washed together into a basin and then buried together. So sometimes you find these things of marine and land things together. The only way is if it's washed together and buried together. And it seems humans and other things lived a bit further away from the sea, a bit higher up. So they'd be buried later as the flood, which began in the ocean, crept up onto the land. Now dinosaurs definitely existed. There can't be any doubt about the fossils we find. And some were huge, like Brachiosaurus with his head up in the 4 or 5 story building. Okay, it's pretty big. And when you look at a little chart I've got here, humans here, tallest animal today, giraffe, Brachiosaurus, 3 times taller, and probably 50 times heavier. The giraffes are slender, and this is pretty stocky. Okay, the blue whale is bigger than any known dinosaur. Yes, the largest animal that ever existed is still in the ocean today. Now, when it comes to very big and very small creatures, despite what you may have seen in some science fiction films, you can't scale up things linearly. Big things and little things have different design requirements. One design requirement is how do you get blood from the heart to the brain? You have to push it uphill. Against gravity, so the higher you are, the harder the heart has to work. So this poor giraffe needs a blood pressure of about 300/180. Now, you know, blood pressure measurements, so you should be about 120 over 80. The first number is when the heart's pushing, and the second number is when the heart's relaxing. Okay, so 120 over 80 is good for humans, but giraffe needs to have that pressure to push it uphill. We'd have a stroke if we got up to 180. 180, they say go to the hospital. Okay, it's called a hypertensive emergency. 160 is too much really for us. 140 is getting on the borderline. But yeah, giraffe has to have the high blood pressure, which means you have to have a special heart that doesn't get build up fibrous deposits like ours would do. Ours is not designed to push that hard. Okay, but then what happens when the giraffe bends? Why doesn't it get a stroke? It's no longer pushing against gravity, and with all that pressure, why doesn't it blow its brains out? That problem baffled scientists for decades. They realized the giraffe has a problem. There must be some design features to stop that happening. And it seems what happens is you have veins in the neck, and so when the giraffe bends, the blood pools from the head, goes back into the veins, so you less blood for the heart to push against, and the pressure drops automatically. And when the giraffe raises the head, the blood goes back to the heart, pushed up to the brain almost immediately. Unlike a human who's lying down, gets up way too quickly and feels lightheaded, because the blood hasn't got to your brain yet, that's why, okay. Giraffe doesn't have that problem. But the point is, a tall creature needs design features to cope with its height that smaller creatures don't need. And when you think about something like the Brachiosaurus, 3 times taller, it would have had a blood pressure of about 750. Now, I don't know how it happened. Unfortunately, with the Brachiosaurus, we got the bones, so I can't tell you the soft parts that actually made it possible, but we know there must have been some design features to make blood pressure of 750 and to cope when this Brachiosaurus bent down to drink. So again, design features are needed for big animals. Now, what was the biggest dinosaur? Anyone want to take a guess about that? Any kids want to take a guess? Any of any age want to take a guess at the biggest dinosaur? A lot of different ideas here. Brontosaurus actually is a fairly big creature. A lot of scientists now say Brontosaurus is not really a real thing because they have an Apatosaurus, a very big creature. A lot of these big things don't have their heads connected when they're fossil, and they put a Camarasaurus head on an Apatosaurus skeleton and called it Brontosaurus. Okay. Now we know that what they thought was a Brontosaurus was a big creature, no question there. But it seems like it was based on a mistaken head. Okay. Now other claim, it wasn't a bad answer though, it was a fairly reasonable answer. But this creature, Amphicelius, was claimed to be enormous, 122, about 200 feet long, okay, so, yeah, and maybe bigger than a blue whale if this is right. The point about this though, you need to ask, what's the evidence? What do they actually find? Like, even when you hear about the latest missing link, it's always good to see, okay, what did you actually find? Maybe you found a few fragments of bones and you're making all these claims about it. Like this thing here, okay, here's a picture here. Here's a human for scale. These are big things. Okay, now you have this creature called Amphicelius. Now the black part is the reconstructed animal. This is what they claim the animal looked like. Now, what they actually found is the white part. Okay, so find one bone, and they tell us what the animal. I don't know how they could possibly know what the neck or the legs or the tail look like. You only got this little bone, the vertebra in the back from the spine, and at that, it's only a partial one. It's not even a whole one. It's broken, and it's so fragile. They call this fragilimus, which means the most fragile. The bones crumbled. We can't go back and measure them anymore because the bone's gone. Okay, but things like Diplodocus, we've got almost complete skeleton of that, so I think we've got a very good idea of what this thing looked like. At least it's muscle, because bones have scars for where the muscles attached, so you can make out what the muscles would have looked like. So that's true, but see, a lot of these other big dinosaurs, again, very few bones. You've got very fragmentary remains of some of these other big dinosaurs, like Argentinosaurus. And now one creature that might have been a big one is the Pagatotitan from Argentina. See how big the humans are by comparison. See, really big. Now there's a reason I'm not just having all the bones in different colors to make it look pretty for you. The different colours mean the bones come from different specimens. So 4 different specimens are used, and you hope they're the same animal, that they fit together. Well, I can believe this creature is big, okay? Just to be aware, though, there are 4 different specimens, hence the different, the technicolor drawing there. Okay, another big creature is this thing called a dreadnoughtus. And again, we've got most of the skeleton below the neck and some bones from the neck. So at least below the neck, we've got a good idea. And one thing, here's a human here. So big creature. And these spines here are very good for attaching muscles. Now we think of it, if you look at here, how big, how thick the tail is, you know, much thicker than a human is wide, okay? And that was basically huge muscles in the tail. So the discoverers said this had a highly weaponized tail, 30 feet long. And that's, I think, a valid claim from what they can tell from the bones, okay? Now the question is, since I mentioned the dinosaurs in the Bible, are they in the Bible? Now here's the thing, the word is not in the Bible, but the fact is in the Bible. I mean, again, these door knockers come around and they brag that the word Trinity is not in the Bible, and they tell you should stick to words that are found in the Bible, so you should point out the word Bible is not found in the Bible. But the fact of a Trinity is in the Bible, because the Bible tells you very clearly there's one God, the Father is God, the Son is God, the Holy Spirit is God. The fact of a Trinity is in the Bible, but the word is not. Same with the dinosaur. The fact of the dinosaur is in the Bible, but the word is not there because the word was a very recent invention. See, a lot of English Bibles, including the King James, were translated over 200 years before the word Bible was invented. So of course, this doesn't have a word that didn't exist. And Sir Richard Owen, the best paleontologist and anatomist of his time, invented the word dinosaur, meaning terrible lizard. It's against a Greek-derived word. He was an opponent of Darwin. Darwin couldn't stand him. He mainly opposed Darwin on scientific grounds. The science has never been on Darwin's side. People adopted it because they wanted an excuse not to believe in God. That's why they really adopted evolution, not because the science was on his side. Now the thing is, words like calculator are much more modern words, are much more ancient words than dinosaur. They had the group called the Merton calculators in the 14th century. When you think of calculators being very modern instruments, but the word is actually much older than the word dinosaur. But there are, here's where I think you do find dinosaurs in the book of Job, which I believe was the earliest book to be finished in the Bible. See, Genesis starts from creation, and we know that, but it goes up to Joseph. I think Job was written around the time of Abraham or Isaac, because there's no mention of a temple priesthood. I mean, he was a priest of his own family. So that's before the Mosaic law. Quite clearly, he's before the Exodus, around Abraham or Isaac, maybe up to Jacob, but so the earliest book to be finished. And in the book of Job, we have God giving a creation lesson. I mean, look how he's going through all these animals. We know what these animals are. Then he gets to Job 40. What do we find? There's behemoth. What does that mean? Well, the translators didn't know, so they didn't translate the word. This remains in the Hebrew. In the Hebrew, it would be pronounced behemoth. Okay, and in the Hebrew, that's a plural term. It means beasts, plural. Behemoth is one beast, behemoth is more than one, but it's a single creature given the plural name because God is saying, this is the beast of beasts. I'm giving you this plural word to emphasize it's the greatest creature that God had made. And he made them basically at the same time as he made humans on day 6 of creation week. And he's a plant eater. But one thing about him, he has his tail like a cedar. And in the Bible, when something is compared to a cedar, it's expressing how amazingly majestic the whole creature is. Because here's what a cedar looks like, and this is not a very big cedar. It's a big tree though. And King Solomon used cedars from Lebanon to build his temple, right? But some study Bibles tell you that behemoth was a hippopotamus or elephant. I think that can't be right, because here is an elephant with its tail. Is that a cedar tree, you think? I mean, a bonsai cedar maybe, that's about all, okay. What about a hippo? No, I don't believe so, but here is a better idea. Now, to remind you, I told you this thing, the discoverer said this had a weaponized tail 30 feet long. That, I think, fits the description of a tail like a cedar, a creature like that. But it doesn't fit an elephant or a hippo. Now, what about the Leviathan? I think Leviathan was not a dinosaur, but it was a giant crocodile, much bigger than the largest ones today. Back in Australia, we have the saltwater crocodile, very dangerous. It catches you and it goes into its death roll or spins so fast everything breaks apart, okay. Here's a human here. But this thing is called a Deinosuchus, was about twice as long, maybe 10 times more massive than the biggest crocs today. I don't think I want to meet one of those. The other thing is you can't fill its skin with harpoons, and this fits a Deinosuchus because it had an armored skeleton, armored skin. It had bony plates in its skin, which would be very effective at repelling harpoons or spears. So I think that this creature fits the description of Leviathan, a giant alligator-like creature. And there are other things where we have evidence of humans and dinosaurs live together, and that goes back to, for instance, this Angkor Wat, which is a temple complex in Cambodia, and you have a stegosaur carving. These plates are very distinctive of a stegosaur, which means either the artist saw one or he had reports of people who'd seen one. And it's interesting, no fossils have been found of this creature anywhere in that area, but they drew clearly a living one. So lots of different things about how humans must have lived with dinosaurs, and it goes into things like dragon legends around the world as well. But now I want to get to things like what happened to them. Well, I think the flood buried most of them. And here's evidence why I think it had to happen that way. When you have dinosaurs caught in the middle of a fight like that, I mean, you've got to bury it quickly to form a fossil. I mean, have you ever seen fossil roadkill? It's not how you get fossils, is it? Because things rot away, they get scavenged. But this must have been fossilized in place like this while they're in the middle of a fight. This is what evolutionists say they were doing. They're fighting, okay, and buried really, really quickly. This is, again, not slow and gradual. And the layers they are in often span continents and even go across different continents in the world. So not that you have rapid burial, but you have enormous layers. And when you have such a huge, wide layer, you know there must have been a huge cause of that wide layer, like a global flood causing these enormous worldwide rock layers that catch things really quickly. Another thing is when they're found, they often have their necks thrown back. And again, that puzzled scientists for a long time, but I think they've realized what went on because they killed some chickens and dunked them in water and their necks swung back. Well, what they realized, I mean, think about this, of holding the weight here. It's not too difficult to do this, right? But if I hold it up here, much more difficult, right? Because you've got the leverage against you. So it seems that animals with long necks and heads had to have elastic ligament to do most of that work. And so when the animal dies, normally go flop, okay, muscles aren't working. But what if the animal was then in some buoyant liquid like water, where it takes the weight of the head and therefore nothing counteracting the pull of this ligament, so it pulls the neck backwards. And when that ligament was cut in the chickens, this didn't happen anymore. So there's an elastic ligament, and it seems that dinosaurs also had, God put an elastic ligament in there to hold up the head. So it means these creatures were in water when they died. So what would cause a lot of dinosaurs to be in this position when they died? They're underwater. So dinosaurs in water, it seems to point to something in my opinion there. But when so many dinosaurs are found, they call this a dinosaur death code. It's that common. So that they were in water when they died. That's inescapable. And footprints, I mean, if you let the footprint outside, how long would it last, do you think? Not very long, right? Okay, but a lot of places around the world, back in my home country of Australia, they uncovered some dinosaur footprints. But they had to lift up the top layer of rock. It was actually in a layer of rock they had to remove the top layer to expose them. But when they were exposed, they started to wear away really quickly. So they put a shed over it. No, that didn't work. So now they're in a conservation building that controls temperature and humidity and running water, running animals, running children. Because they're so fragile, they have to be protected. They're in rock now. They are in rock. But it wears away quickly. But when the footprint is made, the material had to be soft. So, of course, it will wear away even more quickly as soon as it was made. So the answer, it looks like, is that these footprints were laid down and almost immediately buried and cemented in place. So this points to not only we have these rapid layers of rocks that go across continents, but also there's very little time between the layers. Even though they claim that top layer was millions of years younger than the footprint layer, in no way that layer was exposed for millions of years. Because the footprints would wear away. Another interesting thing is that not just dinosaurs, but everywhere you go, you find footprints, but the animal that made them is up here. Footprint down here, animals up here, supposedly millions of years apart, but animals don't live millions of years. So how do you get footprints laid down, but the animal's up here? But what if what instead we have is there's a flood happening, it's creeping up on the land, and the dinosaurs are trying to flee, which is why the footprints are in the same direction. They try to flee away from the water, leaves a footprint, next layer buries those footprints, and eventually the flood catches up with the creature on the higher ground. And that's wherever we look, not just the dinosaurs. But it means really there can't be any time between this layer and that layer. And that's explained that the flood laid it all down in 1 year. Well, actually, basically half a year, because the first half of the flood, 150 days, the flood's rising, that's depositing. As the flood is coming off, it will be eroding and leaving these enormous, first of all, these planations, so that as the flood sheet water came off and planed these flat tops on mountains, you see them, the mountain of flat tops as though a giant had planed the whole top off. And then the flood would carve these enormous valleys, like you see the Grand Canyon is one of them. That's why valleys often have rivers that are way too small for them. They're called underfit rivers. But it makes sense if the floodwater carved the valley and the rivers following the path carved out for it already. Now another thing, see, these are reasons why I think the dinosaurs support a flood, but I think they also support a short time scale, because things like soft tissue have been found in dinosaur bone, and Dr. Mary Schweitzer from Montana has been doing this for over 30 years now. And she said, I couldn't believe it. The bones are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? And you've got soft tissues and even things like dinosaur proteins and DNA. None of these should be around after millions of years. But here they are. And I'll give you Dr. Schweitzer herself on 60 Minutes with Leslie Stahl.
Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was, and it was elastic, like living tissue.
This is the piece.
No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened?
Yes.
That's the dinosaur bone?
Without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this and you think, what? You
I didn't want to tell anybody.
You'd be ridiculed,
Yes.
right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again. I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels, and I was like shocked. I mean,
How could that be?
how could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million.
What is the mission there? Don't they tell us trust the science? Maybe we should trust the science on this. These aren't 1 million years old, let alone 68 million years old. So here's the evidence that the sorry. Talking about the flood makes you thirsty, I think. It might be the mile-high air as well, who knows. So if dinosaurs died in the flood, how come they still survived in Job, which is after the flood, and various other cultures? Well, the answer is they were on the ark. No, not this horrible creek thing here. I hate that picture. Don't ever use that picture, because you use that picture, you're telling your kids the ark's a fairy story. It's not, though. And the Bible tells us how big the ark was. And there's no reason that kids can't see a child-appropriate version of this instead of that stupid bathtub with giraffe necks sticking through a chimney, animals happy and smiling, the world's being destroyed. All their friends and family are being destroyed. Okay, yeah. But see, length is 300 cubits, it's 50 cubits wide, and it's 30 cubits high. So all you need to know is what a cubit is. Well, a cubit is Latin for elbow. Okay, if you have a blood draw from here, this is called the cubital fossa, okay? So cubit means elbow to fingertip. So how long was it? Well, it depends on the person. I mean, you take my cubit, it's about 19 inches, okay? I can be conservative and say it's 18 inches. And if that's the case, the ark would be 1.5 football fields long and wide enough to block 6 lanes of the interstate and 4 stories high. And you look at how tiny the people are by comparison. That's the real ark. Kids can understand how big it was. Don't need the stupid bathtub ark. A real ark like this is far more interesting anyway. And when you consider, you can calculate with how big this was in terms of how much it could carry. Now, the biggest thing on the road today is probably the semi-trailer, or what do you call them here? Tractor trailer, articulated lorry in Britain, Artic for short, okay. Those horrible things on the road that block the signs, you can't see in front of them, and they usually ride abreast of each other. They're not supposed to do that unless they're not supposed to be in the right lane, the left lane, are they? But the road rules apply to everyone else, not them. Okay, but the point is, each of those semi-trailers could carry about 300 sheep, over 100 pounds each. They are used to transport animals, but the ark's capacity was about 340 semi-trailers. And that's a lot. So if each can carry 300 sheep, it means that the whole thing, the ark could hold 100,000 sheep-sized animals. That's big. And most animals are much smaller than a sheep. Most of the rodents and birds and lizards are much tinier than a sheep. Not that many animals are bigger than a sheep. You know them better because big things are more memorable, but most things are much smaller. And also, those dimensions were given for a reason, because some design engineers, they did some scale modeling of the ark and computer simulation, and they found it could stand up to waves 500 feet high. When you think of the devastating Indian Ocean tsunami of about 20 years ago, 100-foot waves did horrible damage. The ark could stand to 500-foot high waves. So God knew what he was doing when he made the ark of the proportions, and it's the box shape that is very stable. He only gave length, breadth, and height. That's dimensions of a box. And the only other dimension he gave was a 1-cubit window across the whole top, which is very good for ventilation. In fact, modern factories often have a window on the top. Very efficient, low-tech way of ventilating the ark. You see, if there was actually a sail or a curve, then God would have to tell you where it is. I mean, if he's going to tell you to put a 1-cubit window on the top, he'll tell you if there's a 10-cubit sail or something, wouldn't he? But he didn't, so it's not there. So the ark was a box shape. Now, what was actually on board the ark? Well, the ark was, this dove was on because Noah sent a dove out, right? To find an olive branch. But I think ladybugs were not, because the animals that were on board are those who breathe through nostrils, because the Bible says that everything which breathed through nostrils was wiped out. Insects breathe through holes in the skin. They actually do breathe, because it's real breathing they do. But it means they can survive off the ark, because the ark would tear up enormous amounts of trees and vegetation, knot it together to form these natural rafts. And this happens with even local floods. So on a global scale, huge rafts would be produced, and small creatures like the ladybugs and the spiders could survive those. The big creatures could not. So this is a way of preserving big creatures that were not on board the ark as passengers, maybe stowaways, but not as passengers. And of course, you don't need to rescue sea creatures from the ark, okay? So jellyfish didn't have to be on board. It's a water thing. Fish and jellyfish and dolphin don't drown in the ocean. So dolphin wasn't on the ark, but this thing was, because it's a land creature. So the ark passengers were all land animals with backbones. So no congressman. And the thing is also, there are kinds, not so-called species. You see, I think there was one cat kind on the ark, because, you know, how I know that is because lions and tigers have babies together. And it's called a liger. If it's a male lion, female tiger, it's a liger. If it's the other way around, it's called a tigon, okay? And they can have babies with leopards. And leopards can have babies with slightly smaller cats, which can have babies with smaller cats. They're called hybrids, these mixed babies, okay, hybrids. But in fact, you can trace it, the tiger to the pussycat. Even if tigers and pussycats can't have babies together, there are things in between that can. So I think there's one cat kind and one dog kind, because wolves really do have babies with some big dogs. And in fact, every dog breed can have babies with every other. Sometimes, like Chihuahua and Great Dane, it has to be done artificially, but it can be done. These will have babies artificially. They're the same species, yeah. And so it means that there are not as many kinds as you might think there were. Like for instance, there's a liger here, but also got things like a kama, which is a camel and llama hybrid. Okay, beefalo, the bison and the ordinary cattle interbreed. Zonky, you can guess what that is, right? And there's also the horse kind included zebras and donkeys, and things like the geep, and pig and boar can do things. Paisley bear, see, polar bear and grizzly. The wolf, and that wasn't on the ark, but it's a killer whale, a false killer whale and bottlenose dolphin, okay? And so let's do some numbers here, a few numbers here. See, even if you call a kind of species, which I don't think is right, you could do it. You could have all species and land vertebrate species on the ark. It could be 60,000 animals altogether. The ark could hold 100,000 sheep-sized animals. But I think the kind was probably bigger. Like the next order up is called a genus. And if that was the case, it'd be 16,000 animals on the ark. And there's plenty of room for all the food and the water. And if the kind was as big as a family, which is the next highest order, which I think is probably more likely, maybe 2,000 animals on the ark. An ark that can hold 100,000 may have needed only 200,000. There were 2,000. And also may have been 50 dinosaur kinds. Lots of names, but only a few dinosaur kinds really. And one thing they've found is that they give different names to babies and to adults. Like these three creatures are all the same kind, all the same species even, they believe now. So this is just a baby, this is a teenager. And the Pachycephalosaurus was the adult. And here is what the discoverer thought. This is Jack Horner. You know the Jack who was on the Mary Schweitzer clip I showed you? It's him, Jack Horner. And he said a third of named dinosaur species may never have existed, but at different stages in the growth of the other known dinosaurs. Giving different names to babies and adults means you think you've got more dinosaurs than you really need, okay? You only need one pair for them, so one pair of these creatures here, not three pairs. And also, dinosaurs started life off as eggs. We know that, no bigger than a football. And they also went through growth spurts. And from growth rings of the bone, we know they went through growth spurts. So what God is the one who picked the animals up. He brought them to Noah, because God said, the animals will come to you, I'm taking care of that. So Noah didn't have to fetch them. God said, I'm taking care of them, they're coming to you. And so maybe God brings a 4-year-old, a Apatosaurus, so 1 year later he's 5 years old, and after he gets off the ark, goes through his growth spurts. 5.5 tons per year, but on the ark he's maybe 1 ton, maybe 5 tons at the most, but then he goes up to 30 tons when he's an adult. So God didn't have to take this creature here. So the answer, it'll ask you about how did God fit the big dinosaurs on the ark, is that they weren't big when they went on. They were young specimens. So a lot of different things you can talk about here. I just want to mention a few things we have on our table that might be useful for dinosaurs. We have books of different ages. This is a dinosaur book for really little kids. Dinosaur book for slightly older. This is maybe middle school and above. I think adults will learn a lot from a book like this. And this is actually found in our dinosaur pack. You see, we've got a pack for all ages, which has some flashcards as well as a comic there, so that's a bargain there, having all those books in one place. For the adults, you might like the Titans of the Earth's Unit. That's my new dinosaur book. I co-authored this book since I was last here, I think. Yeah, since I was last here. A book for the high school and the adults, a very comprehensive book about dinosaurs and what happened to them and what do they eat and when do they live, and just a whole chapters on various different types of animal dinosaurs with different full color illustrations of them. I mean, I will say I don't know what color they were, so there's a bit of imagination going on there, but they are nicely illustrated books there. Another book you might like is my book by design, just hot off the press basically. That's a very new one too. So a lot of good books out there, and don't forget the things like the Answers book, which has a whole lot of good questions too. And as I'm ethnically Jewish myself, I'm allowed to say this, we have a starter pack which has my first book, Refuting Evolution, plus the Creation Answers book, and a free DVD, so it's a real Jewish bargain. Okay, so anyone want to ask me some questions? I have a brief time for questions before the next. Anyone want to ask some questions? I can try and do some questions if you like. Yes, sir.
Did you, while you were in Denver, did you notice that they found a dinosaur fragment under a parking lot down there that's 67 million years old?
I did not know that. I, of course, would dispute the age, but no, I did not. I wasn't aware of that. Yes, no.
It's just some fragments
Oh, I
from
see.
Town, but it's a dinosaur from fragments.
Oh, okay, right. So again, there's a bit of leeway in what the thing actually looked like, I think. I wonder if it even was a dinosaur bone. Who knows? I'll probably find a little bone fragment. I wonder what it really was. Yeah. Any other question?
Do we find any human fossils after
No, the human fossils that we have, again, that's the Creation Answer book, chapter 15 is about human fossils, okay? So to give you an idea, it's a good book to have. There's a chapter on dinosaurs here, a chapter on the floodwaters, a chapter on fitting animals on the ark on this book, you see. So several of the chapters I've covered of this just at this talk. Another chapter is basically what you've talked about, the human fossils. I think, again, because humans lived further from the ocean, they'd be fossilized a bit higher up. But also when the flood ran off, it would erode that part first too. And also when even theologically, God said he wanted to blot out that wicked civilization. In fact, he said the world was full of Hamas. The Hebrew word for violence is Hamas, and that's what it said. The world was full of Hamas before the flood. So God intended to blot out that civilization. So maybe he intended for no humans or trace of that wicked civilization to be found. But also when you consider, I mean, how many people were on the earth at that time? With a world full of violence, I expect the population to be a bit lower than you expect. But when you consider there's maybe 300 million cubic miles of the sedimentary rock formed by the flood, so if the population was as much as 300 million, that's one human for every cubic mile of rock. You'd be lucky if you found it. And if someone did find it, would they realize it's a human remain they found? Because if it's in so-called dinosaur-aged rock, they're not going to call that a human fossil, because humans hadn't evolved by then. And so you see, would you even find it if you were lucky enough to find it? I mean, 95% of fossils are shellfish. Far fewer are actual vertebrates, animals with backbone. So I wouldn't expect to find them necessarily for those reasons. Now, you had a question back there as well? Yes, sir.
You had an illustration where you were showing the different types of dinosaurs, and there was the one large one that you said came from this one bone. Not that one, the one where it was the single bone, on A. So I'm wondering, how do they come to the conclusion that that's the way, from the one bone, that they have a creature this size and those?
Well, they thought it was from an animal version of the Diplodocus, so basically scaled up with the Diplodocus. We know we got the Diplodocus vertebra, we got the complete skeleton. So if it was one of those, you scale it up.
Right.
But I think there's a dispute whether it actually was a Diplodocus. That's the whole point. If one bone, are you sure it's actually one of these creatures? Well, that's the question. Yeah, and also, could it even exist a creature as big as that? That's another question too. So a lot of things, well, what was a part of, and then they try and scale it up in proportion. But again, as I mentioned, there are problems even with trying to scale things because of different design features for different sizes. So scaling has this problem. I mean, that's why I think when you hear of supposedly human giant skeletons 20 feet high, tall or whatever, which have human proportions, they're fake. Because humans can't be scaled up much beyond. I mean, even Goliath, I think, had health problems. He was 9 feet 9, I think, from the Hebrew Bible. I think that's about right. But I mean, in modern times, every human over 8 feet tall has had health problems, hasn't lived very long. Okay, so even humans aren't really meant to be scaled up beyond about 7.5 feet. I think beyond that, there are problems that happen. So 12 feet, 15 feet, forget about it. Okay. Now, maybe you had a question too. Yeah, yes. I believe so, yes. Well, I think they were living near they were land creatures, but they were living fairly close to the water's edge, I think. And well, this was, I think, maybe depending on the neck. Like Brachiosaurus with a neck up like this, very high foliage, while these ones like this may have lived on lower leaf matter, because they couldn't necessarily lift up their head as high as a Brachiosaurus could. So I think these were planty, but maybe different varieties, different heights of plants they took care of. That's all I can think of. But they also seem to eat grass. I mean, that's what they thought grass hadn't evolved by dinosaur time, but they found remains of grass with dinosaur droppings. So grass, little mineral crystals in grass. No, they ate grass. That was shocking for evolutionists that the grass was actually around by then. Yeah. Yes, sir.
So in the Bible, it speaks of humans having very long lifespans prior to
Correct.
the flood.
Yes.
And with the dinosaur that tends to grow over a lifetime.
I have to say that this was an argument used by both creationists and evolutionists, that dinosaurs were very big because they were very old. So both sides used that argument, so I don't blame you at all for using it. But as I mentioned, the growth, what I showed you, that's outdated picture because they shot up very suddenly and then leveled off. See, even though modern reptiles maybe continue to grow, it seems dinosaurs were more like mammals, as they had a growth spurt and leveled out. So it's not because they were very old. That doesn't seem to be a valid explanation anymore, thanks to the discoveries of dinosaur growth ring. But as for why humans lived so long, I will explain why this is the case. You're talking about this issue here, right? And this sort of pattern here, and how the flood is a big boundary. But I think it's sort of a bit of a red herring, because I think the real cause was something different. When you look at the graph here, see the dark green, the medium green lines are the age, the lifespan. Now the light bar here underneath is the age of fatherhood. Now there's no one odd one out there, isn't there? Noah was an extremely old father, the oldest father ever known. So he was 500 years old when he had the oldest, which I think was Japheth, and a few years later he had Shem, a few years later he had Ham. Okay, so he's over 500 years old when he had his children. Now, in case you were wondering, I know Colorado government doesn't agree with me, but men and women are different. Okay, so see, women are born with all their reproductive cells inside. So a pregnant woman carrying a girl is carrying the eggs of her grandchildren too, okay? But see, men keep on generating, from puberty throughout their life, they keep on generating reproductive cells. But the older you are, the more mutations you bring in. See, after the 4, you have genetic copying mistakes called mutations. And when you have mutations, things usually go wrong. So the older the father is, the more mutations he's passing on to his children. So Noah, being a 500-year-old father, has passed a huge load of extra mutations onto humans, and since we all come from Noah's 3 sons, we've all suffered from the effects of Noah's fatherhood. That's why the lifespan dropped so suddenly from Noah down to Shem, and then you have this exponential decay curve. It's a mathematical decay curve, and people living in Moses' time wouldn't have known to make up an exponential decay curve. So the fact that much later we've found that this follows that mathematical curve shows these numbers are authentic, the lifespans are authentic. Just what we'd expect from some sort of shock to the system and this decay downhill. But it's because of Noah's old fatherhood, that's the reason. But I think I mean to hold it there, because I know you've got to get ready for the main service, so I'll cut it off here. But have a look at some of our book tables and the brief break we have. So thank you for your attention.
Yes. Thank you, Jonathan. It took about 10 minutes.